Jordan Watkins is the most underrated player on Ole Miss's roster. Seriously.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, I'm Stephen Willis, a former staff member at Ole Miss and a 10-year veteran member of the national media with Yahoo Sports. Today on the show, we talk about the Ole Miss roster and why this player is so underrated, he can't even get love on underrated list this talking season. Jordan Watkins has been Jaxson Dart's Mr. Reliable over the last year, but with the Ole Miss receiver unit getting better, Watkins is somehow falling between the cushions when it comes to giving credit this preseason. And this official visit weekend is two out-of-state prospects that's getting our attention. They're joining Mario Nash this weekend as players that I am watching. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and on YouTube. Thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day, and a special hello to the everydayers who make the show what it is. July 2nd, under a month from right now, at 7 p.m. Central Time, you can join us at Walk-Ons in Ridgeland, Mississippi for a meet and greet. It's not super organized. It's just kind of a meeting place to get there, but maybe you can get some red beans and rice. Maybe you get some boudin. And, of course, the beer is pretty good at Walk-Ons as well. It's sure to be a lot of fun. It's a chance to grow the Loom community. I'm looking forward to meeting all of you. And also the Rebel Road Trip, sponsored by Dead Soxy, will be in Corinth, Mississippi, June 13th at 6 Central Time at the Crossroads Arena. There's still time also to join the Grove Collective and help Ole Miss football become elite. You can go to thegrovecollective.com and join today. Really interesting stuff indeed. And this is, our What Did We Learn episode, and we are in the middle of talking season. And in talking season, you find out, they do stories about insert storyline. It's like Mad Libs, this, and this. And this week, there's been a couple of articles that I've seen about the most underrated players on Ole Miss's roster. And honestly, it's a pretty good list when you look at it. Even the one with the Grove Report, our partners, our friends at the Grove Report put out, it really is interesting to see. But their list goes like this, okay? They start with Cayden Lee. They said he was a big play threat for the Rebels last season. As soon as he stepped on campus in 2023, his first collegiate reception was a 34-yard touchdown in week 1 against Mercer. While his touchdown was in garbage time of a game that was pretty out of hand, Lee flashed. The rest of the freshman season was quiet until he was called upon in the Peach Bowl because of a Jordan Watkins hand injury. Lee ended the game with 3 receptions for 29 yards. Not an eye-popping stat line, but he looked like he belonged against one of the better secondaries in the country. Keep an eye out for Lee, as he could be a guy that finds it on the field and he won't give the spot back. That's one thing. The next one they did was Akelo Stone. Said Stone was another key depth piece on this revamped defensive line in 2023. Stone had 2.5 sacks from his D-tackle spot and was a big rotational piece for guys like J.J. Pegues. Akelo is going to be called upon once again in 2024 to be a rotational guy for the Rebels, as his abilities to give other guys rest will keep the defensive line fresh. And Cam Franklin at defensive end, the edge rusher from Lake Cormorant, fits the mold of a big-time SEC player that possesses speed and strength. In spring practice, Franklin used his athleticism in one-on-one drills and best pass rush and all of that. But he has the potential to flash in the future with the right development. Randall Joyner is probably licking his chops at what his defensive line and potential for the younger players to look like. With guys like Jared Ivey and Princely Amamiel and ahead of him, Franklin can learn from the likes of very successful pass rushers. Now, really interesting stuff, and that's a very good list from our friends over at the Grove Report and where they're sitting with underrated players. But here is the problem. Both Cayden Lee and Cam Franklin and Akelo Stone all play positions that is just going to be hard to get on the field. You can be a really good, really talented player that flashes when you get on the field, but you're not going to play all of that much. Because of the players that got added in, I argue that the underrated player position has changed a little bit. Whenever you look at, for instance, like you have Tre Harris on campus, who's obviously going to be the number one option at wide receiver, right? Deion Smith, who is obviously going to be one of the top options at wide receiver. When you have Juice Wells, who coming into last season was preseason the best wide receiver in the Southeastern Conference. Do you see what I'm getting at? I think the most underrated player on Ole Miss's roster is none other than Jordan Watkins, who had 53 catches, 741 yards, and 3 touchdowns a year ago. He played 4 games with a broken hand. He returned punt with a contraption over his hand to prevent a broken bone from getting worse. Nobody is talking about Jordan Watkins. He was simply last year's Mr. Reliable for Jaxson Dart. He is the player that whenever Ole Miss needed a first down, when they had to have a completion, Jordan Watkins was the player they looked to. Now, a lot of that was due to the Tre Harris getting double teamed on those positions to make sure he wasn't the guy. But Jordan Watkins was clearly the second option, and he was unbelievably reliable. So reliable, in fact, in the game against Louisiana Monroe that Jaxson Dart was a little bit injured in, Jordan Watkins actually played wide receiver with the broken hand and dropped a deep pass that hit him between the numbers, and everybody was shocked. He had a broken hand. All of the excuses for why that happened was there, but everybody was shocked nonetheless. But when you add him to a room that has Tre Harris, Juice Wells, and Deion Smith, all of a sudden Jordan Watkins kind of becomes maybe the fourth option, but his ability to play inside and outside, because that is a strength that Jordan Watkins has, is going to be important for this team. There are going to be times in the year when Jordan Watkins looks a lot like what Dayton Wade did a year ago, where you're playing on the outside, but doing your work over the middle and doing all the slot type stuff, even though you're lining up on the outside initially. Ole Miss over the last couple of years in this offense, they've kind of tweaked it to the point where they're playing dual slots. Even though it's 11 personnel, they're playing dual slots where a lot of time the tight end and their jumbo wide receiver are the outside receivers, but it doesn't necessarily matter where you start to play it, where you end it. And Jordan Watkins and Dayton Wade have done a lot of damage over the last couple of years. But nobody's talking about Jordan Watkins. Jordan Watkins coming in this year, and this, I'm including myself in this, by the way. I am more than including myself, because I do think that Juice Wells has a chance to be the starting slot coming into this season. I think it's going to be important for Jordan Watkins to essentially cross-train as much as possible so he can find himself on the field, because he is that reliable receiver. He is somebody whose production does not match his attention. And you constantly forget about Jordan Watkins as the player because of these new players that are coming in. The Tre Harrises, the Juice Wells, the Deion Smiths, even Cayden Lee, who is a really good player. And I do think he is an underrated player. But Cayden Lee's going to have a hard time getting over Jordan Watkins to get on the field, much less getting over Jordan Watkins and Juice Wells. So the underrated player, in my opinion, is Jordan Watkins, Mr. Reliable, somebody that has an unbelievable rapport with Jaxson Dart because of how the depth chart looks. Now, if Ole Miss goes and does what we are all expecting it to do, okay, that means the offensive line, just like I told you yesterday, really balled out and made the RPO game very effective. Ole Miss in their dual slot game with Juice Wells and potentially Jordan Watkins, them moving back and forth in personnel grouping and formation, all of a sudden, Jordan Watkins, Juice Wells has a big time type season. Maybe 60, 70 catches would be a Jordan Watkins successful season. Now, Jordan Watkins returning punts, yes, that's absolutely going to happen. Jordan Watkins has all of the confidence of the special teams coach, Lane Kiffin, the whole 9 yards. Jordan Watkins is going to be the one back there returning kicks this season. You're not recruiting people to return kicks. You're not bringing in the player from Southern Illinois or the player from the other one that they brought in, the wide receiver last week. I slipped my mind. From North Texas. You're not bringing them in as a returner. Jordan Watkins is going to return punts this year, and he's going to do it at a very high level. But for those of you that are constantly worried about how something could go wrong in the return game, Jordan Watkins may not be a starter on the field at wide receiver. Now, he's going to be super important to everything Ole Miss does, but there is no guarantee that Jordan Watkins is going to beat out Juice Wells. There's no guarantee that he's going to be out doing Deion Smith, and you know he's not beating out Tre Harris. But his production and his ability to get on the field and him being reliable to Lane Kiffin and the Ole Miss coaching staff means that the potential for this player to have an underrated level of importance for this Ole Miss football team is there. Thanks again for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen of the day. Ole Miss is getting top 2 wide receiver room love nationally, and Jordan Watkins is consistently getting overlooked by everyone like we just talked about, but it's continuing over and over again. Passion, drive, and patience, what the formula is for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance: superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and you have to turn down the volume with all of that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you each and every single day to bring you the biggest stories without all of that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Now, it's really interesting. Like I said, most criminally underrated player on Ole Miss's roster and maybe in the entire Southeastern Conference is Jordan Watkins. I would entertain that conversation that Jordan Watkins might be the most underrated player in all of the SEC. But the reason for that is the talent that is going to surround Jordan Watkins this year. Jordan Watkins gets lost and looked over and everything because of the talent that is going to be on the field for Ole Miss this season. You know, it starts with Tre Harris, okay? Tre Harris last year, 54 catches, 985 yards, and 8 touchdowns when he essentially missed 3 games last season. So this is like 9 games, 10 games worth of data. If he would have played the full season, if he would not have gotten hurt on the first drive against Tulane, he would have probably had somewhere in the neighborhood of 65 to 70 catches, about 1,200 yards, and about 8 to 12 touchdowns, somewhere in there. That would have happened. And because of that, he sucks up all the oxygen that Jordan Watkins would receive. Now, Ole Miss also is getting a transfer, you might say, in Deion Smith from Holmes County Community College. He was the number 1 wide receiver, JUCO wide receiver out there. He is not showing up on these top 2, top 5 lists that you're seeing everywhere. He is not showing up yet. He is not being factored in. And that's the reason that I say that Ole Miss has the best wide receiver room in the entire country. And there's Juice Wells. who last year at this time was being viewed as the number one wide receiver in the entirety of the SEC. He had 68 catches, 928, 6 touchdowns, probably the best run after catch wide receiver in the entire Southeastern Conference, even over Luther Burden. Really, really good player. So whenever you look at Jordan Watkins and what he has done, this play right here in the picture that I put up there on the screen right now, it was a 4th and 2. And even with a broken hand by Jordan Watkins, it was still a simple out play for Jordan Watkins to get. Ole Miss picked up the first down, ended up scoring a touchdown, winning the Egg Bowl, and he is an important player for Jaxson Dart. He is an important player for Jaxson Dart, who last season was 233 for 358, 3,364 yards, 23 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. Now, with the added size being added on the outside in Deion Smith over a Dayton Wade, I figure those touchdown numbers are going to go up fairly significantly. You might be looking at 30 to 35 touchdowns for Jaxson Dart this year. But the reason I bring up this and all of this happening is there's top 5 lists from Lindy's and from the Pro Football Focus and wide receiver rooms and units that are being released. And Ole Miss is pretty consistently being ranked second. If you look at Lindy's, they're ranked second behind Ohio State. If you look at Pro Football Focus, it's this. Second behind the Oregon Ducks as far as top receiving cores in college football, which tells you one thing. Oregon, Ohio State, and Ole Miss, they're interchangeable as they are. And like I told you before, and all the write-ups in these units, Deion Smith is not being factored in. And I think that a lot of people are going to be very surprised at what they see in Deion Smith. Now, I'm talking right now about all the receivers in the Ole Miss receiving room and how Ole Miss is getting love in that receiving room right now. And again, you immediately start talking and Jordan Watkins get pushed down. He is criminally underrated on Ole Miss's roster and in the SEC. Jordan Watkins, I think, is going to play a major role in Ole Miss football this season. He is. It may be a situation to where they play more than 4 wide receivers over the course of a game, because that was Ole Miss's thing. Is like they wanted all the depth in the world, but they were going to play the 4 or 5 guys that they could count on. Like Braylon Brown never got on the field for Ole Miss football for whatever reason. When he did, he made plays. Apparently, there was bust or something in practice, because we talk all the time about how Lane Kiffin and Charlie Weiss Jr., they do not believe in OJT. They will not let you go out there and make mistakes. They need to trust you implicitly so you can run some of the stuff that they're doing, because Ole Miss's offense is simple yet complex. And this is very weird for you to hear probably, but it's simple because it has to be, because of how fast they go. They need to make it as simple as possible so the plays can get in there. You're running a ton of inside zones. Their passing concepts are what it is, but 10% of the time, Lane Kiffin has to be able to whistle and make a call and a quick change on the sideline to where some sort of complex play happens instantly. So you have to know how to do that. So you have to quick twitch remember all of the simple stuff that they do, the inside zones, the quick passing concepts, the RPOs. But occasionally, 10% of the time, Lane Kiffin's going to whistle in, and he's going to need you to do something that is NFL concept-wise. He is going to need you to be able to handle that, because the free safety is leaning a certain direction, or the linebacker is biting up way too hard on the fake, leaving too much of a pad between the backers and the safeties. Something to attack the specific area that Lane Kiffin is trying to attack, you have to be able to do. 90% of the time, it doesn't matter. It's simple, repetitive stuff that you just need to go really fast and execute at a high level. But they do need to be able to count on the wide receiver or the running back or the quarterback, that when Lane Kiffin notices something, he can quickly get that in and get them to where their tempo isn't blown up. It's important, simple but complex. And because of that, the wide receiver has not played many people. Like, I forget the little guy's name, the wide receiver, Henry. Short guy, very fast one. He had a very excellent camp in 2022. Ended up getting a lot of playing time to start the season. Dropped a couple of touchdown passes. And if you drop a touchdown pass, they're not going to play you. You are not going to be on the field if you drop a touchdown pass. They have no sympathy for that. And part of that reason is why Ole Miss has such good wide receivers year in and year out is the expectations that are placed on them. Jordan Watkins is just another example of that. And now, because of all this other talent that has come in, he is the most underrated player on Ole Miss's roster, perhaps the entire SEC. Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen. This is official visit month. It's underway, and 2 out-of-state prospects to join Mario Nash has my attention. I'll tell you about it next. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon free or Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover each and every single league. Find Locked On Sports Today, available now on the free Fire TV channels app. Be part of history. So we are in the middle of official visit month, and part of the official visit month is Mario Nash will be visiting Ole Miss this weekend. Mario Nash is a big-time player. We talked with Brian Smith in tonight's show. So turn into that. He's going to talk a little bit about Mario Nash. He's going to talk a little bit about Winston Watkins as well. Brian Smith, the Florida football scout, talking about Winston Watkins from Fort Myers, Florida, is pretty much a must listen. He's probably one of the better analysts out there on him. But he's joining Watkins is Carson Lawrence from the Macaulay School in Chattanooga, Tennessee, visiting Ole Miss. And Carson Lawrence is a Vanderbilt commit. Yes, you heard me correct. Ole Miss is trying to flip a Vanderbilt commit. Now, if you look at the rankings, they're really all over the place. And you see that more this year than you have in recent memory. Rankings kind of being all over the place and everybody trying to look like the smartest person in the room. But if you look at the consensus, he's a 4-star and he is ranked 163 on the On3. Now, it could be On3 doing a favor for the boy Barton Simmons, who's one of the recruiting guys at Vanderbilt. But he is a really good player, and he obviously has Pete Golding's attention. They're bringing him in on an official visit. He's a safety. You're seeing a lot of safeties getting recruited by Pete Golding. Now, the last couple of years, whenever they're coming in, they're finding corners that could run and transitioning them to safety. The John Saunders, the Jaden Kennedys, those guys, Yam Banks, are corners that can run that's being asked to play safety. But now you're seeing Pete Golding actually recruit safeties that can do specific things so you can get the height and the weight that you're looking for. And I think that Carson Lawrence is going to be a really good player. Now, the other player that we're watching for is Winston Watkins. And Winston Watkins is out of Fort Myers. I talked to Brian Smith. He's 5'9", 5'10", 175 pounds. He kind of does the Elijah Moore thing. He kind of does the typical slot receiver. Cayden Lee would be a good comp for Winston Watkins as well. If you look at his rankings, like he is a consensus 4-star, 177 in the country. He is decommitted, it looks like, from Texas A&M. But he has visited South Carolina and he is visiting Ole Miss this weekend. But if you look at his site-wide rankings, On3 has him as a 3-star, 247 a 4-star, ESPN a 4-star, ranked 178 in the country. Rivals a 5-star, ranked number 17 in the country. This guy's a good football player, and he at least turns somebody's head to do that. Now, why did that happen? We do have a short highlight to show you right here of why that exactly happened. And what you see is that Winston Watkins, with the ball in his hand in open space, is a little bit of a problem. And he has gone to IMG Academy. He's transferred to First Baptist Academy in Fort Myers, Florida. So the competition level may not be as high as it needs to be, but it's still not bad. First Baptist has a very good football program, but this is a guy that technically destroys people, honestly. I think that's the best way to put it. He technically destroys people. I think that he has some Elijah Moore type skills, and I'll ask Brian Smith about it tonight. I think he does have some Elijah Morse type skills that he can utilize. And we've all seen what Lane Kiffin can do with somebody with that skill set. Winston Watkins, like I said, do not look. Anytime that you're dealing with anybody that has a 5-star rating on any of the services, you're never on immediate commit watch. Okay. So don't look for a quick turnaround commit on him. But Ole Miss being in the game with him is at least interesting. Ole Miss has a chance this year to sign 4 5-star players this year, because you look at a Cayden Lee, who is not listed as a 5-star now, but he has a chance to get there because Brian Smith thinks he's the best running back in the entire country. You have Caleb Cunningham, who is a 5-star, who is going through his visit, was on Ole Miss's campus this week. You have Jerome Miles, who is committed to Ole Miss from Corner Canyon, Utah. And you have Winston Watkins, potentially. So you could have a running back and 3 wide receivers committed to Ole Miss in the same class. Legitimately, this could happen, that are 5-star players on some service. High school recruiting is going differently this year. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that Ole Miss won 11 games a year ago. And I talked about this earlier in the week, that this is the year. What made Clemson into what Clemson became in the late 2010s was not the Deshaun Watson and the Hunter Renfrow class. Those are the ones that won the first national championship. It was the players that they were able to recruit off of that championship that made Clemson what they were. The Travis Etienne's and the Trevor Lawrence's, those wide receivers that they were just assembly line doing, the defensive players, they were able to effectively recruit off of a really high level class and was able to continue that at least for like 5 years. Ole Miss, now they still have to get this first part done, but they have the talent and the players to do it. Now they're going and trying to recruit the next part. They're trying to find their Trevor Lawrence. They're trying to find their Travis Etienne. They're trying to find those guys to where your program can go up, 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 up. And next thing you know, it's like, hey, you're having conversations that Georgia's having right now. There's going to be a Georgia fan that pops up in my comments tonight and talking about how Ole Miss has no business doing this, yada, yada, yada. Some of the most smug stuff you'll ever see. You would swear to death it was a Penn State fan. But it is because they've become snobbish about football. And obviously nobody else can do what they do, even though every 10 years, 3 other teams are doing it. You know, it's all cyclical and it rotates. But it just is what it is, and it should be pretty cool. But yes, today's show, in summation, Jordan Watkins is the most underrated player on Ole Miss's football roster and potentially every roster in the Southeastern Conference. If Ole Miss goes to a level that I expect Ole Miss to get to this year, Jordan Watkins will play a monster role for Ole Miss this season. This is on top of Juice Wells, Deion Smith, and Tre Harris. They are going to find a way to make them work. Maybe some 10 personnel happens from time to time, but how do you take Caden Priestcorn and Daquan Wright off the field? It's going to be interesting. You've seen me call for 12 personnel all the time, and I am all for 12 personnel. We might see a little bit of 10 personnel from time to time as well. Just my opinion on that. Thanks again for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and thank you. We have the most perspective surrounding Ole Miss sports, and it's one of the many reasons why we are the number one Ole Miss podcast out there, and thank you for that. This week's top 5 topic is the top 5 wide receivers in Ole Miss history. Put my list out yesterday. You can go check that out on the YouTube page. But for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. They've launched their first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On plus our national shows that are covering every single league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV Channels app. For those of you on YouTube, we will send you there right now. Howdy toddy, everyone.